Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today's presentation is about data management plan. Well, the presentation is a part of a playlist on open science, and we are going to talk about two objectives here. First of all, to encourage researchers to adopt open science in general, and definitely learn the basics of how to develop a data management plans and to create a research data management plan. The content of the presentation will be mainly an introduction followed by a definition of what is a data management plan, what is the data lifecycle, how to do it, how to do the data management plan, what is the content, and some takeaway messages. Well, let's start with the introduction. First of all, why is open data relevant? Well, we need to share our data sets because it promises to speed discoveries, improve reproducibility, and expand economic development. In the same time, it promotes a more accurate verification of scientific results. And definitely funders and publishers, they ask to share data and consider themselves proprietary from collection for publication. So it's important to be ready for this moment. The value of sharing data in general, it has to do with the importance of open peer review. So the data should be able to be used by the scientific community researchers beyond the research that you have been doing. And you have to ask yourself, why are these data useful or important if you are planning to share them? You need to make sure that the answer to this question is positive. And also who can benefit from these data and how these stakeholders can benefit from it is another important question, so that you prepare the data sets in a way so that those stakeholders can benefit from it. And you need to ask yourself also, before deciding to share any data, how can these data be used, reused for further insights and development of experiments. So this is very important as a starting criteria. Once you answer these questions positively, you can start and move on and start to share your data. Now, what is the definition of the data? Here is the question of the second section. Now, research data is simply defined as data underlying publication and necessarily to validate research results or any other data indicated in the data management plan, including metadata. So this is first definition. What are the different formats of data? In the context of the research process, these data may be data figures, statistics, results of experiments, experimental measurements, field observations, survey results, audio or video recordings, interviews, or other mediums. And as you can see here, we can see also different representation. It can be lab notes, it can be physical samples, simulation results, polls, forms, audio files, images, experimental research or results, tables, maps, documents, and so on. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about data. Now, what is a data set content? Allow me to give you an example. It can be a folder full of tables in Excel or CSV file format. It can be an organized collection of tables, a file in a proprietary format that contains data, collection of files that together constitute some meaningful data set, a structured object with data in some other format that you might want to load into a special tool for processing images capturing data, or files relating to machine learning such as trained parameters or neural network structure definitions. So these are all examples of data. Now let's move to the third part, which is the data set lifecycle. What is the life cycle of a data set? Well, we need to make into account that there are different stages for any data set. It starts normally by data collection or data creation, then you start to process the data, data analysis, followed by data preservation, and then data access, and finally allowing for data reuse. So these are the main steps. On the left side, you might find some other items that are not on the graph, like storing and curating the data. This is important. Formatting the data, filtering and sampling the data, and publishing and sharing the data. But those are the key steps in general when we're talking about data. And in other example, we can say that simply the life cycle of a data comprises the creation, the processing and the storage, and the third step is the preservation. As you can see, other schemes here, they are talking about planning, considering ethics and legal issues, organizing and documenting, storing and sharing, publishing, and finally reporting and archiving. So overall, those are the main key steps, and you need to be at least aware about them. And in the very basic way, you can say it's those 3 steps I mentioned here before. Now let's go with the first step. What is data creation? Data creation occurs early on, and here you have to identify your needs. You need to know what are the data format, the size, the source, what is your acquisition technique, what is the method that you'll acquire this data, and what is the quality of your data. And also you need to have a plan for your data management. So here you have to think about where are you going to store it, who will be having access to this data, are you going to comply with any standards, are you going to comply with any regulation like the GDPR, are you going to have approvals from specific committees. All this information you need to think early on before you start collecting data to make sure that you will answer this question, including the storage for sure. And here are 2 websites that are very relevant. There is a website called here Make a Data Management Plan, http dmponline.be. Here you can find, it's a very nice website because you can find examples and open access of data management plans. So you can download them and check them if you want to have an example. And also there is an existing database of data management plans, which is the http www.re3data.org. This website also has a bank of existing data management plans. You can use them for getting inspired to have an example. But let's move from this first step, the data creation, to the second step, which is the data processing and the data storage. And here we are talking about security issues, backups, confidentiality, who will get access, are these on owned servers or on third-party servers, hosting, the organization, naming of the files, the sizing of the files, how are you going to curate the files, the formats, is there any ISO standards you will comply with to produce your files, are you going to arrange the files in a way, how you document them, what will be the versioning of these data, how to make this traceable, and what will be the final repository where this data will be stored. So this is an example, and also you have to think not only about storage, but you have to think about processing, the integrity, fraud, data torture. You need to make sure that this data will not be squeezed and used several times for different purposes. How relevant is this data? Do you need to have any specific expertise or training to make sure that you can acquire this data? And definitely you need also in this stage to inquire about the ownership. Is this data owned by the funder or by the principal investigator who are acquiring this data? So these are all important questions to answer in the second stage of developing of your data management plan. Step 3, which is the final for the data management plan, those are the overall guidelines, is to look at the refreshment. And here you have to think about, is there any periodical moving of the file from storage medium to another to avoid obsolescence of the storage medium. For example, you have them on a specific server, and then after 20 years or 15 years, you move them to another server, you make sure that you have a new computer, and so on. Or if you have them on a hard disk, and then maybe in the future you are afraid that this generation of hard disk doesn't exist, even the cabling and the connections, so you think how you will refresh the data. Number B, or number 2, regarding the data preservation is the migration. So here we are talking about periodically converting the data from one software configuration to another one, or from one generation technology to a subsequent generation technology. This is also a very important matter because some software, they get obsolete, they are not used anymore, or file extensions. If you all remember the word doc, DOC extension, it doesn't exist, or it's hardly existing anymore. Now we are using DOCX. So this could be a reflection on how to migrate the data and transform all the files from DOC, doc to docs, for example. And finally, the third aspect related to the data preservation is the emulation. And here we are combining software and hardware to reproduce the essential characteristics of one computer to another, allowing programs designed for a particular environment to operate in a different one. And here you are talking about, if you are talking about a software that you are using or repositing. So these are all different techniques that you need to look at when you are talking about data preservation, the refreshment, the migration, and the emulation. Now, I'm ending up talking about the guidelines, and now I want to talk with you about some examples of data management plans, or as we call them, the DMPs. First of all, you need to have a table of content. So here you have a definition of your data management plan. You need to define who is the data owner, and you have to have a delivery of your data management plan. Starting with the definition, the data management plan is a document that explains the terms of collection and or production, processing, documentation, protection, dissemination, sharing, and preservation, as well as the associated cost during and after the project. Very important. You need to distinguish the dataset owner. So here, original data have to be produced by the authors at a recognized professional research or academic institution. And definitely you need to distinguish dataset owner and other function-specific roles that require distinguishing, including the owner or the curator or the steward or the governance board. So these are very important matters. Also, you need to look at the second step, which is the delivery of your data management plan. And here you must describe the choices made in terms of types of data collected or produced, metadata formats, the means provided to guarantee the protection of the data, in particular with regard to privacy. And the data management plan is a living document that needs to be updated during the project stages. This is very important. It's not only the data management plan that will be submitted during the proposal writing stage or early in the beginning of the project. It's a living document, meaning that during the project you need to update it and you have to report to the funders on your updates and your improvements. Even if you plan to not share partially or totally any data from your project, you must submit a data management plan. So this is important to take into consideration. Funders will ask you to have a data management plan regardless of you are going for a open access data set publishing or not. Also, you need to comply with the FAIR principles, and if you are not aware about them, I advise you to look at my previous video on open data. But simply the FAIR principles, they require you to store your data and management under those 4 paradigms. The data needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Those are the 4 main basics. And the funding recipients are encouraged to structure the data according to the FAIR principles in order to facilitate the reuse for research purposes and for indexing. So it's very important to look at that and make sure that your data management plan is complying with the FAIR principles. Now, what is the content of a data management plan? Let me get you more into detail. Number 1, you will have a description of the data collection or reuse of existing data, and you need to answer the following question. How will the new data be collected or produced, and how will existing data be reused? This is the question, and you answer this question, you have the first paragraph in your data management plan. Second question to answer under the first item, what data, for example, the formats or the volumes, that will be collected or produced? You need to describe it and you need to define it. Is it CSV files? Is it Word files? Is it GIS files? Whatever data type you are going to generate. And in this sense, you need to describe it in a paragraph. Second item in your data management plan after the description of the data, it will be the documentation and the data quality that you have. And here you have to answer the following question. Question 1, what metadata and what documentation will accompany the data? For example, the methodology of data collection and how to organize the data. You need to answer that. And you need to answer the second question, what data quality control measures will be taken? How are you going to assure the quality of your data? It's very important to look at that. Third item in your data management plan that you need to have a title or a section under it, you answer the following question. Storage and backup during the research process. How are you going to do it? So here you have to answer the following question. How will data and metadata be stored and saved during the research? And how research data security and protection of sensitive data will be ensured during the research. And here it's very important to make sure that you talk about the servers that you are going to have. How are you going to blur any personal information if you are taking images in public, or personal or faces or a car plate number? Are you going to have a blurring technique if you have personal information from surveys? How are you going to anonymize the persons, and how you are going to store this data in a secure place? So this is very important to here look at, and the storage here is entailing also doing it on local servers or on institutional servers or on third-party servers. And some funders, they ask you explicitly for data security to host all your data on in-house servers. So this is an example of the questions that need to be answered. Now, question 4, which is part of your data management plan, is to think about legal and ethical requirement and codes of conduct. And here you have to address the following items. If the personal data is processed, how does compliance with law on personal data and on security will be ensured? In this sense, if you are in Europe, you need to comply with the GDPR. There are equivalent in other countries. So this is here where we have to talk about it. Also, how other legal issues such as property rights, intellectual property will be managed. Is this data protected with IP right? Is it secured, not open access, or is it going to be an open access format? This depending on the funding and depend on the type of research. But here you need to state if the data is protected, how long it will be protected, and is it ever going to be accessible or not. And finally, here in this section also you need to answer the question of what is the law applicable in the case of our project. Imagine you are doing a project between two different countries. Which countries you will abide to its laws versus what are the existing ethical issues and codes of conduct, and how will they be taken into account if there is a committee approval that needs to, ethical committee in your university or in your institution. You need to address all these aspects and how we are going to deal with them. And you can even talk here about a risk assessment for your data and different alternatives on the risk mitigation strategies. Point number 5 before number 6 is the data sharing and the long-term retention. This is also important to look at, and in this section you need to talk about how and when will the data be shared. Are the data, or are there any restriction possible for data sharing or any embargo, and what are the reasons of the embargo and how long is the embargo? So this would need to be addressed here. How will be the data preserved, be selected, and where the data will be then retained or maintained on the long term, for example, a data repository or an archive or our own cloud. This all needs to be addressed. And what methods or software tools are needed to access the data and use it. This is very important, and you need to also describe the software very well, and it would be worth it to publish a data article on your data set so that others can directly find a full documentation of your data sharing on the long term and how you will do the retention. And then the final part of your data management plan was item number 6. This could be the 6th chapter of your data management plan, which is the data management responsibilities and resources. Here you will need to answer the question who, role, position, or institution will be responsible of managing the data during the project mainly. Is there any data controller? Is there any data officer? This needs to be addressed here. What resources do you have? Financial resources, time. Are you going to dedicate meetings every 3 months or during the regular meeting? Are you going to discuss the data management plan? Who will be devoted to manage the data and ensure that it is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, as we mentioned in regard to the FAIR principle? For example, here you can say that every quarter meeting or every half-year meeting we will have dedicating 10% of the meeting time to discuss the data management and the data responsible with Mr. or Madam X, Mrs. X, and so on. So these are all examples of your data set. Allow me to give you an example of the Belgian data management plan at my university. You can see that we have a website, this dmponline.be. There's a lot of examples for free. I strongly advise you to go on this website and just check existing data management plans and get inspired. But as you can see, this is the submission platform of the National Research Institution in Belgium, the FNRS. And as you can see, they are asking me to comply with the 6 requirements that I mentioned: the data description and collection or reuse of existing data. Number 2, documentation and data quality. Number 3, storage and backup during the research process. Number 4, legal and ethical requirements, codes and codes of conduct. Number 5, data sharing and long-term preservation. Number 6, data management responsibility and resources. And next to this, there is another issue, another item called GDPR, all the regulations on personal data treatment. And there is something even called DPI, which is a strict data impact or risk assessment plan if the data is risky. If you want to know more about the GDPR, don't hesitate to watch my previous video on that. And this brings us to the end of today's today's presentation, some takeaway messages to wrap up. Well, the data management plan is very important, and it's part today of many research proposals. You need to be ready, you need to know what it is, you need to know the life cycle of data management plans. And in this sense, my first advice is to develop the data management plan as a team, involve all the stakeholders or the key stakeholders in your project, develop with them the data management plan, and discuss who will provide input in your data management plan. The data management plan should have an owner. So at the end of the day, don't forget that the funder of the project or the principal investigators, they will be the owners of the data. It depends on the rules. Also, you have to use a template or a checklist to structure the plan and break it down into logical parts. I strongly advise you to use the structure of 6 items that I showed you in this presentation. If not, you can have the European Union Open Access Guidelines. They are also providing a template. You can look also at the data management plan should involve recording considerable details. It has to be detailed as much possible. For example, you need to talk about the files, the file organization, the naming of the files, how you will process the files, instruction about hosting, and so on. Make data sharing also central in your plan. This is very important. Convey the message that you try to share if your project nature allow for that. And your data management plan should be identifying the repositories and the servers that will host the work. And definitely use the data management plan when you start your project. Don't just file it and then forget about it. And in general, seek data management training courses so that you know more about this topic. And as I told you before, today many funders, they will require, if the project is very sensitive, that you host your information on institution-owned servers and not on third parties. So you cannot use a Google Drive, you cannot use Microsoft 361 Drive, for example. So you need to be aware from the beginning how you will manage the data, if you will use maybe a cloud or a third party when it comes to general data, but if you have very sensitive data, you will have them on owned servers. Those all concerns need to be brought in the picture, and you exercise the management of your data in a professional way. Well, thank you very much for your attention. This presentation was part of a playlist on open science. Don't hesitate to watch previous videos or next videos that are coming up. And today's presentation was mainly about data management plan. Good luck with your research projects.